Hey Sophia, this is Ajay. I hope you are excited to get a art kit in the mail. Well, what you're seeing on the screen right now is another book from the same artist and who also is someone that I follow and I've learned a lot of things. So I've sent you everything that is needed to do this art, and while it may seem complicated, I want to share with you some of my early ones, and you'll realize that anyone can do a lot of art using this technique anywhere, anytime. All you need is a small art kit. So this is one of my first early art pieces. As you can see, it's just black and white. We're going to talk a little bit about it. Here is another one, just a random scene. Here is a little bit more color. I'm just randomly opening pages up. Here is a fire station in the neighborhood. Here is a neighbor's house, our neighbor's house. Here is a flower. And here is a stack of different things that I have done and are just randomly sitting here. And as you can see, the reason I'm showing you all this is I am just wanting to let you know, if you keep doing a lot of art, you can create one every day and just get better and better. I'm going to show you the rest of my collection, which hangs on my wall. So hope you are excited. If I can do it, anyone can do it. All right, let's start with what you have. I sent you a book that is by the same author. This is not the same book, but it will tell you step by step on how this artist uses his techniques, and I follow that pretty much exactly, and you can too. But using that, you can, as I said, draw all sorts of these things pretty quickly, believe it or not. All right, the next thing you have is a set of watercolors. You have a slightly fewer set. I usually don't use all of those, but it's a really nice simple set. You have a few brushes. These are kind of the same what you have in your packet. You have some paper, which I have some paper as well, and then you have two pens. The lighter pen is what you start off with, no pencil. You don't need a pencil. And you have a finer pen, it's called micro, and that you do that for some final shading. We'll talk about that. What you don't have is this ink. And I'm going to send this to your dad. I couldn't send this in the mail because it's liquid and it can leak, but he needs to buy this. And then 3 jars. These are just 2-ounce, very tiny jars. And in a minute, I'm going to show you how to create some shaded ink in that. All right, let's start with creating some ink. So the first jar is always going to be your clear water jar. It's the jar you use to clean your brushes. So no ink in it, always should have clear water, and then you can dump it out whenever you need to. The second jar is half filled with water. It's right now I've filled it with water. And the third jar is filled to the top with water. What we're going to do is we're going to open this ink bottle that I just showed you a minute ago and pour 6 drops of ink into both the jars. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right. That should give you 2 shades of ink. The one with a lot of water is going to be your lighter shade of ink. The one in the middle with half the water is going to be your darker shade of ink. We'll show you how that works in a second. Okay, so now we have the lighter ink, which is in the jar that is filled up. You have the darker ink, which is in the smaller jar. And then you have water to just clean the brush. Just to show how the ink works, I am going to draw a small chart and put 5 columns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. And the beauty of this pens is these are waterproof. So you can simply, once the ink dries, you can simply paint over it and it's perfectly fine. So we're going to start with the lightest ink and we're going to just color the whole thing. Yep, so this is the lightest ink. Now, we're going to start to build something known as the tone. So, except for the first square, I am going to put another ink wash, this is called ink wash, on the other 4 squares. And what is going to happen is those 4 squares are going to start to darken. And we're going to keep going. Okay, so now the first wash, it took like a minute to dry. And so as I said, I'm going to cover the other 4 squares except the first one with the same light ink. And you'll start to notice that the other 4 are now already looking dark and this continues to be light. Okay, so I'll let it dry and I'm going to do the same thing. Now I'm only going to use the same light ink to cover the last 3 boxes so that it gets even darker. And so this is how I build contrast, what is known as contrast and or values. So they start to build up and you will see it as once it's finished. Okay, for the last 2 boxes, I'm going to use the darker ink because now I'm going to try and make it even darker, the contrast. So in my first round, I am going to just fill the last 2 boxes. And it's really important to make sure all your washes are dry before you put on the next wash. So, as you can see many different shades of gray. And we'll come back and finish the last box, which is going to be the darkest of the dark boxes. Okay, now it's somewhat dried, so I am going to color the last box with one more wash of the darkest dark ink. And then while it's drying, if you think about one more box on this side, that's your lightest light, which is white. And then this is your darkest dark, which is pretty dark. And the reason I showed this is everything that you're going to be doing is going to take form based on this value scale. And we're going to do a quick sketch using this technique to show how easy it is if you remember these values and use them in every painting. Okay, so I picked 3 random objects just to make a point that you can draw anything that were just lying in the kitchen, 3 different colors, and we're going to use this technique to see what it looks like. The beauty of this is, other than you, no one needs to know what you're done or doing or how it turned out. So don't ever think about the final product or worry about what people, Yanis, whoever else will say about this. It's for you to enjoy and learn. So, a few things to just observe in this picture. I'm sure you have done still life in school, but I'm just going to reiterate it. You can see this is a light source here. I placed it here. You always want to know where light is coming from. So on this object, on these objects, you have light is coming from this side. So you can see this is the lighter side. You have some shadows forming in the dark. We have some shadows right here on this salt shaker. You have some dark here inside where, as you can see, there is a bunch of shadows falling. Now those are the things that honestly define every object when you take it from a three-dimensional real object onto a two-dimensional on a piece of paper. That's it. If you master that, you got everything else that works out to look realistic as possible. Let's get started. Okay, first things first. As you can see, I'm starting straight with the pen. That's the best thing to do. You can do a rough sketch with a pencil just to have positioning, but I have noticed I enjoy it the most when I just get it going, get it started. And what I start off typically is by looking at the edges and the contours of the objects that I showed you. So that's what I'm going to start drawing. Really not worry about what it's going to look like, what it's going to turn. I always typically try to start with the object that is mostly in the front and try to just give it a go. So I'm just going to give it a go. I'm going to take as little time as possible in trying to build this, but as I said, I try to build it on contours, and we'll see what that looks like. Okay, so as you just saw, I basically ended up drawing this. Particularly not trying to overly make it perfect, draw it as it looks, and well, got a decent outcomes. And it's the beauty of this is not doing it without an eraser allows you the freedom to not worry about how the end product is going to look, because sometimes that funky look really makes it look nice, in my opinion. So now I am going to show how I start with that shading that we just talked about using ink first. So with the ink, just like I did the value scale, we're going to start with the lightest ink and essentially going to cover the entire object, except in places where you see a lot of white or where there are a lot of highlights. Otherwise, we're going to just essentially just give it an ink wash. That's really what we're trying to do here. Not overly worry about. Definitely want to just leave places where you see highlights, which is the reflected areas. But I'm going to really wrong ink. We'll start with just this wash of ink. And we'll put it in time lapse. Okay, so I finished my first wash with the lightest of lightings, and as you can see, I've covered most of it, of the thing, except and I've left some highlights now in white. But other than that, most of the pieces is covered with this initial ink, the light ink. Now what I'm going to do, just like I did the other value boxes, I am going to use the same light ink to start to darken areas that are in the shadow for the most part, and then start to build the values. So that's what I'm going to do, and then eventually I'm going to go to the darkest dark ink, just like I did in that value system. Okay, so now I've applied the darkest dark ink into these darkest areas. I can actually do one more inner coat and make it look even come out, but I'm going to leave it now and we're going to show how we can do that with the pen. So now we're going to go into the color stage. And in the color stage, you have really done all of the groundwork. This is known as the grisaille technique. This was used extensively in French Renaissance oil painting, where you would paint everything in black and white and then simply wash it over with colors. And the way we start with colors is you start just like a printing process. You start with the yellows. So this is going to be a yellow. Then you go to the reds. So you have a red here. So we're going to use the reds on the bottle. And then you go to the greens and the blues, which this acorn squash is going to do that for us. And you'll see how simple it is once you have done this construction. Okay, here we are with our exciting coloring stage. As I said, I'm going to start with the yellows, and I'm just going to pick one of these yellows. You may not have that many choices, but it doesn't matter. All yellows are the same. If you think they're garish or too yellow, you can tone them down a little bit, adding a little brown. This one is actually brown, but I'm going to start with the yellow and see what it looks like. Put maybe a tiny bit of brown in there, just to tone it down. Still pretty much a yellow. And just mix enough color. Okay, and the simplicity and the beauty of this is you're going to color this entire salt shaker with yellow, except for the white highlights. Or if you want to keep some white for the salt, that's fine as well. But otherwise, you're just going to color it. That's it. You don't have to think much, don't have to do much. Just color it. Unless you see some white super highlights where you want to maintain it as a reflection of light. And that's the only part that stays white. I'm going to keep the middle part a little bit white as well. To show that it has sugar. And the rest. Okay, there you go. So you have that done. Next, you go for the reds. So I'm going to use this as a red bottle thing. And you can always come and put another wash on what you just did, so don't worry about. So we're going to go with the bottle. Oh, the bottle has actually orange top, but I'm just going to go with the red top. And just red on top. Really not worrying about anything just other than the white highlights. Just red on top. That's it. We'll let it dry. Okay. Then we're going to go for the acorn squash green. Alright, and then as I said, again, barring the white highlights, I'm just gonna go with it. Go with the flow. back and use some yellow on the stem here. A little bit. Then I'm going to let it dry before we put on the next coat. Okay, so now I decide the first wash is dry, and so now I decided I wanted to make the salt shaker a little bit more brown. So in the same yellow, I add a little bit brown, and it looks like this, light brown. If you don't like it, you can add a little bit more yellow, maybe a little lighter, doesn't matter. You're just kind of having fun. And then you go ahead and paint right over what you just did. And with watercolor, what it does, I'm sure you've used watercolor before, is it starts to look very sophisticated very quickly when you start to see colors that are transparent lying on top of each other. Just have to be thoughtful about how you use them. Once you get the technique, it's pretty darn simple. Okay, so the tone and the saturation of the color is slightly now getting richer, starting to look a little bit more nicer. I've kept the white in there for the salt, but I was able to change the tone. Now we'll go back to the bottle. Not a big fan of what that color looks like, so we're going to give it a little bit. There, nice. Give it a little bit more body, if you will. So this time increase the saturation or the hue or the color, whatever you want to call it. Don't worry about all the terms, doesn't mean anything other than it needs to look the way you think it should, and it doesn't matter. All right, so the bottle is starting to look better. I didn't really like this green, and my set doesn't have the best greens, I don't think. I might just change it a little bit and maybe make it a little bit more brown. Darken it with brown. Or even maybe add a little blue. Alright, so hopefully this is going to look a little better. Same thing. Go back and color over what you just did. Don't color over the highlights. The highlights are the ones where the light is reflecting off. It's just an important part of the technique to leave those highlights as they are, so it looks like light is reflecting off those things. All right, so I darkened the hues, looks a little bit more richer, and we'll let it dry and come back. All right, now I decided I'm going to simplify this, and I'm going to stop with the watercolors. You can put another coat on it and make it look even more rich, but to complete this video, I am going to now go back to the pen that is marked as micro. Now always make sure that your washes are dry before you start anything else, and I'm going to restart reconstructing some of these edges that got lost, and also use this to do a little bit more shading that will give it a little bit more life, and that's something that really finishes off the project. Okay, so essentially at this point I have re-outlined it so that it looks a little bit more emphasized, and then I'm going to show the technique on how I use this micro pen to show a little bit of texture on this, and all it is dots, squares, highlights in places that you really want to emphasize. So for example, I want to emphasize this knot going in, or the contour of this thing. I'm gonna go out and do a little highlight, and that's where you're going to add a little depth to the painting, just a little more character. Don't overdo it. I sometimes overdo it, get lost in this process. I can do this for hours, but you get the idea. I love doing this. It makes it look very sophisticated, and the idea is it starts to bring the viewer's eye to the shape of things that they are. A little bit of drama to the thing. Makes it look more artistic, painterly, whatever you want to call it, whatever words people use, big words, meaningless. Okay, then what the thing looks like. That's what it looks like. And this is what it looks like on. And this is what it looks like on my piece of paper. And I'm gonna sign it and date it. December 3rd. 2020 for Sophia. All right, this completes your Christmas present. I am hoping you will draw one picture every day during your winter break. Find objects all around the house. Use the book. Once you now follow this video and use the book, you have every technique that Stephen Reddy and I have to produce beautiful pieces of work, beautiful in your eyes and no one else's, doesn't matter. I hope you enjoy. Merry Christmas to you guys all. Thank you, Giannis. Thank you, Christina. Have a good time.